So this is the Rose Meadow, but we've decided actually to call it the Family Garden, not after my book Family Gardens, which I wrote maybe 33 years ago or something, but after the family who are here. So I've got a bull mastiff and a Jack Russell buried here that probably died 20-30 years ago, who were great family friends. I've got my mother-in-law's ashes under the lovely quince tree, which she gave us. I've got lots of things from my mother's garden after she passed away, such as the font, some of the topiary, and the Barbara Austin rose, which was named after her by my uncle David Austin, around the tree there, which has also got John Cushner's rose, which I took from his garden, a cutting from years ago when he was still alive, who I worked with on Gardener's Question Time. And then we've got the statue of my father up on the wall behind, and that was done by my Aunt Pat, who is married to David Austin, and there's lots of David Austin roses here, and Aunt Pat was a sculptress, and she did that of my father when he was about 29 or something, and it's meant to be him pulling himself up by the bootstraps, because my father was a sort of self-made man, and he married my mother, who came from a more wealthier family, and so it was always a bit of a family joke. And I think it's a really, really nice statue, one of her nicest, and it's lovely to look up at that and see him pulling himself up by his bootstraps. And his whole thing, his whole attitude to life was one of joie de vivre. He always looked on the bright side of things. So that's really nice to have him looking down onto this. So when I started off, I killed off all the ivy and the comfrey with glyphosate, and then I have then just planted it. Now obviously comfrey, this is this lovely Symphytum hidcote, which I love, but it is quite invasive, and obviously it will have shed loads of seeds in this area, so I've got to keep my eye on it, and I've got to keep pulling out those comfrey seedlings. But I basically want it to look quite well furnished by about June. In about a month's time, I want to have most of the ground covered. And so what I've done is I've cheated in the first year. I put in lots of tulips, and you can just see the remains of the Claudia, the purple and white one, that are just about going over. I've put in lots of allium, which are just coming out now and looking quite good. Lots of camassia, bluebells, and those lovely Eremurus. You see those plants with the lovely big flowers, foliage, spiky foliage coming up, and they're called the foxtail lily, and they will send up massive plumes that will be bigger than me, that look like foxtails, hence foxtail lily, their common name. So it's Eremurus robusta, and those plumes will be sort of whitey pinky colour. And when I was working in Japan, you would see huge meadows of them, and I thought they looked spectacular. So bulbs are a very easy way to add cheap and cheerful colour, and I will probably go on adding bulbs over the years, different bulbs. And then I've also been picking plants like forget-me-nots, foxgloves, hellebores and things like that from other parts of the garden, and I've just been retransplanting them in here just to cover the land. Another method I've used to make the borders appear fuller in this first year is I've sown the Pictorial Meadow seeds. So you can see they're just coming through now. At last we've had a flush of rain and they've germinated nicely. And so in 6 to 8 weeks they'll be flowering, and I might have to thin 1 or 2 out to give space to the plants they're growing next to. But I don't mind doing that. I'd rather have a more over-burgeoning look of planting, a fuller look, and pull a few things out, rather than have a sparse look, which is so common in the first year. There's no real theme, it's just meadow planting. Doesn't really look much like a rose meadow at the moment, because all the roses have gone in as rooted cuttings pretty much. Eventually I'll have lovely big shrub roses with this meadow floor underneath. So I have planted some grasses amongst them, a lot that I've grown from seed, and then I've got some nice umbelliferas like the Baltic parsley coming up there. So I've got many different plants in here. It's all just very informal, and they're all just hugger-mugger together, and there's no real planting design, but I think the exuberance and hopefully the fuller ground cover will be what is pulling it together. Having said that, I have got the instant topiary, which I got from my mum, and as you see, I've left them in their pots, and I've planted the yew around the base, which will hide the pots, and then I'll clip them into the shape that I want. So those add structure in the winter. The hazels frame the path going through from the meadow to the walled garden, and if you remember, we cut them right down because they had got very thick and very heavy. And because we've cut them back so severely, we've coppiced them back, they're only just shooting now. Whereas if I look at hazels in the hedgerows, they will have been in quite full leaf for about 3 weeks or so at least, I would think. And that always happens when you cut something hard back, it takes longer to grow back into leaf. But that's fine. I mean, that will help a lot when those shoots have come up, because it does look a wee bit naked around the metal archway. I'm really pleased with my latest addition to this garden, and that's the seat around the tree. Now, it might not be looking, well, it might be looking a bit worse for the wear, but I got it from eBay for £18. It does need a little bit of TLC, it's a bit rusted, but I'm just going to decide what colour to paint it, and then I'll rub the rust down and I'll repaint it. I've moved 2 standard boxes in baseless pots either side of it to sort of form an end to it. And then I've got 2 lovely Rosa Bengal Beauty, which is a lovely red rose which flowers from sort of March, April, right the way through almost to December. And I got a cutting of that from Nigel Slater's garden when I was interviewing him. I did ask him. And then I'm going to put one of those rooted cuttings either side of the bench, and I'm going to pull them over in an arch using a bit of wire perhaps attached to the tree trunk, or a bit of string or something like that, just so it really beds the seat in. I'm really enjoying making this garden, and I go through it every day on my way to open up the greenhouses and to shut them in the evening. And it's just nice to think of my friends and relations and my old dogs and things that are here, and it really does bring back those memories. And it's a different style of planting to what I have elsewhere, and that's always fun when you break your mould a bit and do something different. Highly experimental. I'm sure I'll rip out 1 or 2 things this autumn, and I'm sure I'll add loads more as I acquire them this summer, but it's mainly homegrown things from cuttings, and that's what I love about it. It's sort of freebies, really. You might not recognise this space because there have been 1 or 2 rather substantial changes. Before, we had the key to Polytunnel here, and we had it for 1.5 years or so, and I've actually decided to remove it because I think possibly due to the light levels with the trees and the wood so close, the light levels were just too low to grow tomatoes and aubergines very well at all, which is what I really wanted it for. So what I did is I asked them to take it back, which they happily did. And then now I'm just trying it for this summer, just having it as a sort of vegetable plot mainly, and a cut foliage plot and a little nursery bed there. I've decided that I might actually put in the autumn a prototype of an ETFE polythene house. Now these film houses let a lot more light through. They let more light through than glass. You would double glaze it so it would have better insulation than glass, and it would be really interesting to try because as far as I know there have been none on a domestic scale, so I just wanted a small domestic scale highly efficient film cover for this. Having said that, I do rather like it like this. I think it's a lovely little garden. It does seem highly productive. I've changed the hedge. Because I'm not having to hide the glass house, I've cut the hedge down. I've moved the entrance so it's more central, and I'm forming a yew arch over it. I've cut down the philodendron hedge at the end because I don't need to hide the polythene tunnel again. And so I can look back at the house, I can look out to the meadow. It's a lovely place to work, and I can also, because it's really hidden from the house, I can grow as many crops in here that need covers. So I'm going to mainly have my brassicas here, which I'll need to cover for most of the time because of flea beetle, because of pigeons, because of aphids, because of everything. So a lot of these crops will be covered a lot of the time, but at the moment I've got cauliflower, I've got leeks coming up, I've got onions, I've got mange tout, I've got brassica plants, I've got lots of spinach, I've had radishes, onions, carrots, all sorts, and lettuce. So I've got a lovely mix here. It's a nice place to come and work, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm really thinking, do I really want to cover this? Because I have got my 2 old greenhouses down the bottom where I can grow my tomatoes and cucumbers and things like that. But I'm always a bit of a sucker for experimentation, and the ETFE, where we've used it on the cold frames, I've been completely amazed at how efficient they are. Those frames, I've had crops of radishes in them which have come and gone. The lettuce seems to mature really fast, so I've got a lot of cut and come again in there. I've got kohlrabi in there. And because the ETFE lets all the spectrum of light through, far more than glass, and is a good insulator, the flavour, the brix level or sugar level of the crops I'm growing in there is far superior to that grown under glass, and the plants seem so healthy. So I do feel slightly torn, and to have a small prototype greenhouse with that material here would be quite fascinating to play around with. I planted the shelter belt about 38 years ago, I think it was, something like that. And obviously it was a highly windy site, so the trees have done amazingly. But now as the trees have grown up, the canopies are becoming quite bare below. So there's going to be an opportunity for the wind to come whistling through underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant a shrub layer along the back end of that woodland on the windward side. Now, normally you would just go and buy bare root transplant trees for about 20-30p a pop, and I'd plant them in. But the problem is they don't start lifting those trees in the nurseries till about the end of November. It just depends how cold the autumn is, but it's usually towards the end of November nowadays with global warming. And the best time to establish bare root trees, or any trees really, is right in September. Because in September, the soil is warmer, the roots get down, and so then when we have the spring droughts, they're quite well established, and so they don't suffer so much. So how do you plant trees in September if the nurseries haven't started lifting them? So what I've done is I found a whole load of seedlings. They've just grown up this year. I picked up 55, I think it was, from 2 big plant containers. And I transplanted them in full leaf, which is not great, but it seems to have worked. As long as you give them water, they do establish quite quickly like that. So I popped them in a nursery bed just here. And so come September, when we get to a damp patch in September, I will lift them. They'll still be in leaf. I'll pop them in the place where I want to plant them, having cleaned all the weeds from below first, so they won't have competition in their first year. And I'll keep them competition free for 3 years until their roots are right down, because that way they grow 70% faster than if they're competing with grass and weeds and things like that. And so come September, I'll lift them up, possibly with leaves on, plant them, water them, and then they should get away to a good start. Because it's a difficult situation to establish new planting when you've got big old trees already there. So I'm just taking extra steps. I might well have to get the hose pipe out a bit as well to help it all along. I was interested to see what sort of trees they are that have seeded in, mainly from that woodland. And there's a lot of field maple, Acer campestre, which is really easy to establish. There's some ash, and I don't think you can buy ash now because of Chilara ash disease. But I think when I've grown it on my own soil, it's okay to transplant. I've got some lime seedlings in there. So there's a fair old mix, and I've got some wild cherry as well. So I'll probably carry on lifting up the odd seedling I saw. I also saw a yew seedling, but I won't put that in there because the livestock might be able to reach over the fence and eat it, and obviously yew, Taxus baccata, is quite toxic. But it'd be a nice mix of mainly natives. Lime is not really a native, but the others are. And I think in 10 years' time, we'll really reap the benefits of it. And that's what gardening's about. It's about the long-term continuum. You plant your tree belt, you fill in the gaps as the canopy grows up, then you fill in the understory, and you carry on monitoring watering it and managing it so it gives you the sort of climate and aspect that you want. So that's quite exciting, and they're a simple way to get free trees and to green up my woodland belt. Also in that space I've got some bluebells and I've got some wood anemones. Now what I did was I planted a load of those as dry bulbs about a year ago underneath the woodland. Now obviously because I planted the woodland there were no bluebells there, but I wanted to get some in there. I knew it was quite difficult to get bluebells established in the woodland because it is so dry underneath, and we do have very dry springs. And so I planted about 20 or 30 of them in this nursery bed, and they are performing far better than any out in the woodland because I'm watering them and watching over them and weeding them. And then when they die down, the flowers, I'm going to lift them in the green as well as the wood anemones, and I'm going to plant them out there and water them well, and then hopefully in maybe 10-15 years time I'll have sheets of beautiful blue bluebells underneath my woodland belt. This is another exciting new venture. These are my hardy eucalyptus. I met Hilary Collins, who has a nursery called hardy eucalyptus, and she's written a book about fantastic foliage and how to farm it, all about eucalyptus varieties for cutting. And I'm quite partial to eucalyptus because I remember my mother on her nursery, she had an area only about the size of this space here, and she used to fill it with all sorts of unusual eucalyptus. And then every time she went down to London for a jaunt or work or whatever, she would cut the foliage of all these unusual varieties, stuff them in the back of the car, and then take them to really high-end florists. And she made quite a buck or two like that. Now I wanted to find out what sort of eucalyptus are hardy to grow outside, and so I went to hardy eucalyptus and I had a good look round with her, and then we selected 6 different types of eucalyptus which I bought and planted back here maybe about 3 months ago, something like that. Now these are obviously quite young trees, and they are very nice, but I'm not going to cut them yet. I'm going to wait, and I will wait till probably the end of March next year, which is around National Eucalyptus Day, sometime in March I think. And at that point these stems should have grown to about 50 centimetres diameter. That's about the diameter of my wrist. And so when they've reached those proportions, what I will do is I will just totally cut the trunk at about 90 centimetres, about like that. And then maybe come July, they will start to bush out and they'll put out lots of foliage. But I won't really do anything with that foliage until about September, October, when I should have a fair amount of it. And then I can start gradually picking. Now when they mature and they've been here for a few years and I've been cutting them back regularly every year, every March, obviously I will have much bigger resources to cut from. But I think really for my purposes inside I have got quite a lot here. They're all very different, they're all lovely, and I think I'm going to have a lot of fun with these. Now this first one is Eucalyptus perenniana, and I think this is fascinating because what happens when the leaves go slightly khaki colour is you can actually spin them on the branch, so they come away from the stem and they're like little spinning wheels. And the nickname, or the common name of this, is the spinning gum, and that is why these lovely leaves just will spin round on the stem. I've never seen that in any plant before, but I think that's a lovely plant. It's a lovely colour, it's nicely speckled, it's got a slightly pink edge to the stem, and I like it very much. Then the other ones that I really like, well, I think this is nice. This is Eucalyptus rubida, and you can see why it's called rubida, because it's got these lovely red speckles on the leaves. It's also got quite a large leaf, and its common name is candlebark, and I think it is because it's got this strikingly coloured red stems that sort of glow like a candle. So that's going to be lovely, I think, to play around with too. And my third favourite is this one, Eucalyptus coccifera, and you can see this is quite different from the others. Fine, silver-leafed foliage, and it's really quite dainty. And that's what's lovely about these eucalyptus. They're such contrasting leaf forms that if you're any good at floristry and foliage arrangements, then I think these will give you a really good head start. And the other species I have here are Eucalyptus parvula, Eucalyptus nicolai, and Eucalyptus camphora. So I'm watering them now, obviously, because they've only been planted recently. It's been incredibly dry. But what also interested me when I visited Hillary's nursery is that she had lots of mature coppiced multistems, and they look magnificent. And she sold them to landscapers who are doing sort of modern London gardens and things like that. Whereas we often get questions on Gardeners' Question Time about, I've got this massive Eucalyptus gunnii, which is, 10 metres tall, what shall I do with it? But these were, not only were they more unusual than the gunnii, they were really beautiful foliage forms, but because she'd maintained them as coppiced trees or multistems, they were maintained at a height of about 3 or 4 metres. They had their wonderful striking trunks, which you really could see when they're grown as a multistem. And I thought they were ideal if you were doing a modern city garden and you wanted 1 or 2 specimen trees. It made me think that actually eucalyptus are a wonderful species that we perhaps don't use enough, because so many people have had bad experiences with Eucalyptus gunnii. But if we use them correctly, they offer us a wealth of opportunity.